you talk about two selves in terms of how life is lived, the experienced self and the remembering self. Can you describe the distinction between the two?
Well, sure. I mean, there is an aspect of life that occasionally, most of the time we just live, and we have experiences, and they're better and they're worse, and it goes on over time. And mostly we forget everything that happens, or we forget most of what happens. Then occasionally, when something ends or at different points, you evaluate the past and you form a memory, and the memory is schematic. It's not that you can roll a film of an interaction. You construct, in effect, the elements of a story about an episode. So there is the experience and there is the story that is created about the experience. And that's what I call the remembering. So I had the image of two selves. So there is a self that lives and there is a self that evaluates life. Now, the paradox and the deep paradox in that is that we have one system or one self that does the living, but the other system, the remembering self, is all we get to keep. And basically, decision-making and everything that we do is governed by our memories, not by what actually happened. It's governed by the story that we told ourselves or by the story that we're keeping. So that's the distinction.
I mean, there's a lot of brilliant ideas about the pursuit of happiness that come out of that. What are the properties of happiness which emerge from remembering self?
There are properties of how we construct stories that are really important. So that I studied a few, but a couple are really very striking. And one is that in stories, time doesn't matter. There's a sequence of events, or there are highlights or not, and how long it took. They lived happily ever after, or and 3 years later, something. Time really doesn't matter. And in stories, events matter, but time doesn't. That leads to a very interesting set of problems, because time is all we got to live. I mean, time is the currency of life. And yet time is not represented basically in evaluative memories. So that creates a lot of paradoxes that I've thought about.
Yeah, they're fascinating. But if you were to give advice on how one lives a happy life, based on such properties, what's the optimal?
Well, I abandoned happiness research because I couldn't solve that problem. I couldn't see. And in the first place, it's very clear that if you do talk in terms of those two selves, then that what makes the remembering self happy and what makes the experiencing self happy are different things. And I asked the question of, suppose you're planning a vacation, and you're just told that at the end of the vacation, you'll get an amnesic drug, so you remember nothing. And they'll also destroy all your photos, so there'll be nothing. Would you still go to the same vacation? And it turns out we go to vacations in large part to construct memories, not to have experiences, but to construct memories. And it turns out that the vacation that you would want for yourself, if you knew you will not remember, is probably not the same vacation that you will want for yourself if you will remember. So I have no solution to these problems, but clearly those are big issues.
And you've talked about issues. You've talked about sort of how many minutes or hours you spend about the vacation. It's an interesting way to think about it, because that's how you really experience the vacation outside the being in it. But there's also a modern, I don't know if you think about this or interact with it, there's a modern way to magnify the remembering self, which is by posting on Instagram, on Twitter, on social networks. a lot of people live life for the picture that you take, that you post somewhere. And now thousands of people share it, and potentially millions. And then you can relive it even much more than just those minutes. Do you think about that magnification much?
I'm too old for social networks. I've never seen Instagram, so I cannot really speak intelligently about those things. I'm just too old.
But it's interesting to watch the exact effects you described.
It will make a very big difference. And it will also make a difference, and that I don't know whether. It's clear that in some ways, the devices that serve us supplant function. So you don't have to remember phone numbers. You really don't have to know facts. The number of conversations I'm involved with where somebody says, well, let's look it up.
Yeah.
So it's in a way, it's made conversations, it means that it's much less important to know things. It used to be very important to know things. This is changing. So the requirements of that we have for ourselves and for other people are changing because of all those supports, and I have no idea what Instagram does, but it's
well, I'll tell you,
I wish I knew.
I wish I could just have my remembering self could enjoy this conversation, but I'll get to enjoy it even more by watching it and then talking to others. It'll be about 100,000 people, as scary as it's to say, will listen or watch this, right? It changes things. It changes the experience of the world. That you seek out experiences which could be shared in that way. And I haven't seen it's the same effects that you described, and I don't think the psychology of that magnification has been described yet, because it's a new world.
The sharing. There was a time when people read books, and and you could assume that your friends had read the same books that you read. So there was
kind of invisible sharing.
There was a lot of sharing going on, and there was a lot of assumed common knowledge, and that was built in. It was obvious that you had read the New York Times. It was obvious that you had read the reviews. So a lot was taken for granted that was shared. And when there were 3 television channels, it was obvious that you'd seen one of them, probably the same. So sharing
has always been there.
Was always there. It was just different.